was my wedding anniversary not too long ago, and I actually did the right thing and bought some flowers for my wife. Don't always remember that, but yeah, I do. And I got a message to say they got delivered along with this picture of flowers outside the door. Not my door, somebody's door. And I didn't recognize it, so I didn't know where it was. So I went online and to try and get some help to actually try and get these flowers before the end of today, because it's going to be time critical. And I got chatting to a very nice AI agent. It was actually really well made, but it's clearly an AI bot. But the only thing that really gave it away was it was very quick. It was actually otherwise really good. But of course, it figured out quite quickly that it couldn't help me. So it said, I'm going to hand you over to humans, which was great, except crickets. Absolutely nothing happened after that. And it's sort of a good point about a lot of what goes on with AI, because the guys who designed that AI, or the team that designed that AI, really did realize that there's things AI can do and there are things AI can't do. And they knew to give it instructions that when you can't do this, do something else, give it to some humans to do. But clearly the management team hadn't been paying attention. They just said to sack all the customer service staff. And that is really common. We see that a lot. Okay? And I think it's epitomises so much of what's wrong with how AI is being rolled out. So hopefully today we can talk about make this slightly more sensible approach to how to actually use AI in business. So firstly, I'm Frans. I'm the CTO of NewOrbit. We design and build systems that enable organizations to scale. That's very much where we are. Our main brand is NewOrbit. See a bit of that. We also have Native, which is our sister brand, which we use for things like what I'm doing today, so to talk to organizations about AI. So those are the brands we have. Feel free to reach out. I like to talk about this stuff. And you can hit me on LinkedIn and on Blue Sky. Not do the health side anymore. Okay. So structure today, we've got introduction, which I've just done. I'm going to talk to you about how to identify good candidates for AI use cases when we're talking about embedding it in your system processes, and give you some tools and frameworks around that. And going to give you a bunch of examples that I've come across just to maybe inspire some thinking. And that's the bulk of what we're going to do today, go through those examples. And then I'm going to give you some clues about how to actually design this, and when you're thinking about putting it into systems, sort of some approaches and ways to do that. And sort of a little bit about the management approach, how you manage your organization change and identification, because again, that's something that gets misunderstood a lot. So I'm going to give you a few pointers around that. Now, there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep this at a relatively high level. This is about sort of sparking ideas and giving you some good points to talk to where to start. And the good news is, because we started 10 minutes earlier, we're well ahead of time, and that's really nice, so we can talk a bit slower. Okay. So before I get into the first thing, so I just wanted to define a couple of terms, okay? So I think we came up with this term, or somebody did, called personal productivity AI. And when I talk about that, that's the you using Claude or Claude Code or Copilot or whatever. It's the user initiated. A human is interacting with an AI saying, do this stuff for me, do these kind of things. We just call that personal productivity AI, just to clarify that's what it is. And I'm not talking about that today. There's tons and tons to talk about with that subject, governance and training and how you roll that out, but that's not for today. That's a different conversation. What I'm going to talk about is something that is happening a lot, but there's very little talk about it. When you go and follow the social media on AI, very few people talk very much about this. This is the thing about you have a system or you have a process, putting AI inside of that autonomous piece, the thing where the AI use is not user initiated. It is a system or process triggers the use of AI. It may feed it back to human, it may react on it autonomously, that kind of thing. That's what we're talking about today, embedding AI. I don't think there's enough talk about it. There isn't enough debate about how to do that. So a lot of us are left trying to figure it out for ourselves. So again, that's what we're trying to talk a little bit more about today. Cool. And there we talk about codes, semi-autonomous planning, compliance. Compliance is a big thing. I'm not touching on that today, but think a lot about compliance when you do this, because there's a lot of areas where this can be very dangerous. I'm looking at Adam here because I think this is basically the big job. Okay. So just before we sort of get into this thing, I just want to say, I think there's a lot of hype around AI. I think there's a lot of people running around and like, okay, this is like, it's going to take over the world and everything's going to be different. I don't think that's true. I really don't. Personally, I am of the view that the current large language models, so they were based on an invention in 2018 that Google, the whole transformer concept, right? And I personally believe that they are sort of running out of steam. I think the models as we see are hitting the top of the S-curve. That's my view. I can't prove that. I might be wrong, but that's my impression from what I'm seeing. What isn't stopping is the stuff we put around the way we use AI. And I think even if the large language models got no better at all as of today, I reckon we have seen maybe 2% of the change in society that's going to happen because of AI. So, as I say, I don't believe they're going to take over everything, but I do believe that most of the change is still to come. If you're not dealing with it, you're going to have a problem. I think it's a paradigm shift. And to illustrate that, I'm going to talk about the internal combustion engine. Now, I hate this example because I like the environment, but it makes a really good point. And it's a really weird one that I got here. So it's made out of plastic. That's supposed to be an ICP, okay? So if you think about just food, right? So literally go back 150 years. Food production was essentially centered around the paradigm that you have a farm, you put food on a horse and cart, and you drag it into a market. That's how food worked, right? Effectively, you're talking about food being produced and consumed within a 50 to 25 kilometer radius. Now start thinking about what does that mean for society and our society structure? What does it mean for power structures, for everything? But it's huge, right? With the internal combustion engine and a few other things like refrigeration, we fundamentally changed how food production and distribution works. It's now a global thing, right? The farms, you get the food from the farm on a truck, drives 100 kilometers to a distribution center, drives 90 kilometers back to a supermarket down the road from the farm. But it's a completely different thing, right? And if you think about internal combustion engines, especially when they were invented, they were crap, right? There was so much they couldn't do. They were noisy, they were failure prone, accidents, all sorts of stuff. They still cost this, right? And if you were in food production back then, you could sit there and say, oh, these combustion engines, they're not very good. You're going to just keep doing the horse and cart. And you could have been out of business. AI is the same thing. Okay? It is a fundamental paradigm shift, and it will change how businesses work. And I like to stress that point because so many people I speak to, they really haven't woken up to that at all, right? Or at least only a very little. So that's the key of that. So in terms of AI, okay, so there's a couple of things. The first one is this software. I think a lot of us are in the software industry, right? We have been automating deterministic work for decades. That's what we do. Things you can put an algorithm on. Even machine learning and deep learning, they're still deterministic. They basically collapse down into math formulas, right? What's new and completely fundamentally different is we can now automate some non-deterministic work. Okay? That's new. We've never been able to do that before. That's a paradigm shift. That's why it opens up things where computers could just never touch it before. We can now. We can't do everything, and not at all, but it can do things we could never do before. That's important. It's also important to understand that this allows us not just to change how we do what we already do. It also means we can do things we couldn't do before. Okay? And I don't know what those are, but they are coming out, and there will be many more things coming out. Just to remind you, back in those days when I talked about the horse and cart thing, something like 90+% of the world economy was getting stuff out of the ground, mining and farming. That's now 8% globally. So somehow, we've invented about 90% of the world's economic output has been invented in the last couple of years. It didn't exist before, right? AI, it's not the same scale, but it's the same principle. So you're going to go to see completely new products and everything coming out that just wasn't there before. And I think also the flip side of that paradigm shift and the non-deterministic nature is, by definition, you can't predict how this is going to work in your business. So when you have, the boss is saying, oh, okay, we need a 3-year strategic plan, we need a roadmap, we need to know what you're going to do, when you're going to deliver it, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, what the outputs are. It is by definition not possible because we are automating non-deterministic work. The fact that it's non-deterministic means that the solutions are non-deterministic. Okay, that's a really hard sell, but it's important to really get that across. You need to get people to understand that you need to do experimentation. Now, you still need to have outcomes. You need to make sure that you talk about what does the business want to achieve, where do they want to go. But when somebody says to you, give me a 3-year project plan and an investment plan, you can't do it. It makes no sense. Outcomes make sense, experiments, inputs make sense, but you can't sit there and plan how you're going to do it because you don't want you to try. You just don't. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, let's talk about how to identify some good cases. So we came up with this thing. It's supposed to be an ideation framework. It's so we try to identify or group things you can do with AI in your business into 3 categories. Now, these are very poor categories, right? Because they are massively overlapping. So don't try and use it to argue with yourself about whether an idea belongs in one box or the other. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to use this as a prompts. Okay, so I'll talk about what they mean. But the idea is that you should ask yourselves, do we have a use for this kind of thing? Is there some way we do this? Okay. Now, I'm going to start in the bottom right-hand corner with generation. Generation is the one that everybody raves about. Hey, it's in the name, generative AI. Right? So this is the one where you get AI to write stuff for you. It's the write my email for me. Now, in my experience, that's the least useful use case. It's where AI makes the most mistakes, it hallucinates the most, it's least directed, it's least predictable. I don't like that. I will give you a few examples of where we have used it and are using it successfully, but it's not what I would start with in a business. It never is, because as I say, it's much harder to make work well. But it is the sexiest, don't get me wrong. The thing that I find by far the most powerful is comprehension. So what I talk about there is AI reading stuff and so on. And you're probably all using it already. So if you record a Teams call, right, that call or that call recording goes to an AI that summarizes it, gives you a list of tasks. That's what I call comprehension. I know that it's writing stuff, but that's not the magic. The magic is its understanding of all of that info. I find that when you use AI to do that job, reading transcripts, reading legal documents, giving you opinions, comparing things, it is really very predictable. It's very solid, and you can make it really a really reliable solution. Because it's constrained, it knows exactly what it needs to do. It's not looking at the internet. It's not relying on all sorts of stuff it's learned. It's a very contained box that you're getting it to look at. Right? So for me, that's the first one. And so the thing there is to say, okay, where in my business am I relying on people reading stuff to figure out what it's about? Okay, and I'm going to give you some examples in a minute. But that's a really good thought exercise because you can always come up with there's definitely people sitting somewhere in the organization that are receiving stuff and they're sitting there reading through it. And then they're writing a summary or sending to somebody else or something. So there's always those. And the AI is brilliant at that, really genuinely brilliant at that. And it's super easy to prototype as well. And then there's categorization. Okay, so this is where you're trying to put things into buckets. Okay, what kind of support ticket is that customer happy? I mean, those kind of things. Now, those are traditionally very much the purview of machine learning and deep learning and those kind of things. You know, is this a cat or is this a dog? Right? That's categorization, machine learning, great stuff. But, and if you can get machine learning to do it, please do. It's way, way cheaper and faster, okay, to run it. But machine learning, because it's a mathematical formula, relies on a big data set and you have to do lots of training and yada, yada, yada. So it's hard to get started with, usually. Whereas a large language model, you can just give it, 10,000 support tickets or something and say, hey, can you just read through these and, put them into these 5 buckets that I have. And it will do that, and you've done it in an hour. If you wanted to do the same thing with machine learning, it's probably too much project. Okay. So that's the difference. So that's why I think it's very powerful and very, very overlooked, categorization as a category for embedding AI. Again, I'll come back to some examples. All right, so comprehension. I think I already explained what that was all about. Right. So I've got a few examples. So we had a company coming to us talking about they do training, and part of that training is they do role plays. So they'll sit people down, talk to each other, and then they'll record them. And then every evening on these training courses, the poor trainer has to sit there with his headphones on and he's to tell them what they're listening to these transcripts. and making notes and saying, you said this, and you said this, and then you said this. And so 30% of your statements were like positive and 10% were negative and that kind of stuff. And this poor trainer has to do this every night and then train all day. Horrible job, right? But then the next day they can come back and we can do this coaching. So it turns out it's actually relatively easy to get an AI to do that for you. I mean, it requires some thinking and stuff, but I think we up together a prototype in about a week that could do that job for you. That's just an example of this comprehension thing, because you're giving it data and then it will understand that and categorize it. So you can tweak that and play with that. But it did a job on a par with the human inside of a week. You can't do better than that, can you? So second example, you bet you've all tried this one, right? You've got this brilliant CV, you've got it put into Reading, and it's beautiful and it's fantastic, and you come onto the job site, and we literally did this for a time. We did a big job site for somebody. And then I like, fill in my application form. Damn CV, right? No, fill in the application form. So it turns out AI is brilliant. When you give it a form, ideally, the technical audience, you structure the form in a JSON format, and you say to the AI, here's some information, here's the CV and some user profile and stuff. Here's a JSON structure. Can you try and fill in the JSON structure from that data over there? It's brilliant at it. Okay. In this particular job site, every single customer had their own job application form. So we couldn't even do like a generic one. So it was literally, okay, that customer, this is the JSON structure for their application form. Boom, here we go. We just automate the thing. We've done some prototypes with other things like medical referrals and stuff like that, where people have to type into forms and be like, well, so they already have an email that describes the problem. Can we fill in the form for them? It's really, really easy to do. And you'd be surprised at how good AI is at doing this job. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. And if you imagine next time you go on a job site, at least it tries to do it. In fact, the CV says there's been used to be an HR software back in the day, for like 30 years, people had expensive proprietary software to pass CVs. Don't need that anymore. Yeah, they can do the job for you almost as well and for a fraction of the cost. And then this is an interesting one. So this is a domain of a client we work with who they do like kind of medical consultations online. So they talk to people about certain things. And it's very structured. It's very narrow thing. It's not like a wide open thing. But it's a narrow confined thing, and they do a consult and then they write a report up. Now, the report has a defined format. It's not an open-ended, just write whatever. And the interview is not open-ended. It's structured and confined, right? But they do 600 a day of these things. So what they have been working on is to get an AI to actually write the report from the transcript. And we're talking about one person going from being able to do 7 a day to doing 8 a day. Now, when you're doing 600 a day, that's pretty big. That's quite a lot of people, right? So it's and that's like their step one. Now, I can see a future where they start getting the AI to do some of the consult, but that's not a big position. But it's a relatively straightforward thing, and it works because it's confined, it's constrained, right? It's not an open-ended, hey, here's a chat between two people about everything in the world. It goes from write some summary about everything. That's a lot harder. This is quite easy to do. Okay. Perfect. So categorization. So that's the next thing. Administration there. Categorizing things. Very good. So company we work with, we didn't do this, but I like this example. So company we work with, they do loans. They are an ethical lender. They score for something called CDFIs. They lend money to people who can't otherwise get loans. Not paid in lenders. It's properly ethical. But it turns out the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, they have a requirement that if you are a lender, you have to identify what they define as vulnerable customers. And that means if you're talking to your bank about a loan and they find out that you've just been divorced or lost your job or perhaps going on in your life, they actually have to flag you as vulnerable and they have to maybe not loan to you or give you extra safeguards. That's a legal requirement for these guys, right? Now, this particular client, they're doing tens of thousands of calls a month. Now, so they train all of their staff, of course, for listening out for these things, but it's hard, right? Because people are not going to tell you I'm in a bad place. So you've got to listen for some quite subtle signs. So they're still training people, they're not replacing that. But they thought, well, could we do some quality assurance? How could we get somebody to listen to some of these calls and check we're doing it right? And then they said, well, actually, could we get an AI to listen to some of the calls? And then we're like, well, actually, if we're listening to some of the calls, you might well listen to all of them. So they basically build their own transformers and their own AI to listen to all of the calls that are going through, and then flagging up saying, hey, I think you missed that this person might be vulnerable. I saw these red flags in the conversation. And so they're using it to, of course, abide by the legal requirements, but more importantly, try and do something good by being a bit better at helping vulnerable people. So that's a really nice little use case. Probably not going to make them any money that one, but it's really nice. Triage. So there's lots and lots of examples of triage. I'm going to give you one. It's back to the medical world again, just because that particular system has so many good use cases for AI. So this particular example I'm going to give you, we have people being referred into a medical company for certain things. It's a limited kind of thing, and you consider an application form. And then trained clinicians, nurses and doctors, sit there all day reading these forms and say, if that person's going to need to be referred to a physio, they need to be referred to a doctor, they need to go to a psychiatrist, and so on. This is an emergency, do something about that. Turns out the humans are pretty good at it, but they're not actually perfect. When we've actually done AI and that, the AI does better. Turns out when we ran AI over it, we came back and had like a bunch of cases where we got it wrong before, but then they went back and found out the humans did it wrong. They even found a case where the same human had done the same form twice and decided with two different outcomes. AI doesn't do that. So that's a really good thing, but there are lots and lots of places where you can do that triage. So if you think about it in your organization, you probably have a supporting box that goes in, and then somebody decides who does it ever allocate it to. You get sales teams coming in, where do they go? Or you get cases coming in, are they high price or low price, those kind of things. Those are all good use cases for having an AI-based triage system. I'm not saying replace the humans, I'm just saying do the dross right. If you can do 50 or 60% of the cases because they're obvious, you'll quiz in. More importantly, if you can identify, even if you just do this one thing, identify the high priority stuff that's coming in. So it doesn't have to sit there and you queue for 3 hours before somebody reads it, right? That's a good, even if that's the only thing you do, just say, read this, and anything that looks high priority, flag it up to somebody straight away. That's pretty good, right? So it's a pretty easy use case to do again, and something you should have a look at. So yeah, it's not just labels, it's not just saving money, it's also more consistent quality, because as I said, you actually tend to get better quality with AI doing this, because it doesn't get tired. That's a quick example of getting tired from a completely different talk I did about AI in finance. I found an interesting statistic. The loan applications are more likely to be declined if they're reviewed just before lunch. True fact. So it's one of those things. AI isn't like that. It doesn't get hungry and tired. This one is a little bit of an edge case because you might argue this is not about embedding. I have an example of embedding. So one of the things you get is asking soft questions like, what are our customers actually asking us for in our support things? And if you've ever been involved in this, you're probably used to having these support systems where there's a drop down with 400 categories of support tickets, isn't it right? That one. And you can never, and the one you actually get asked for isn't it that, because that's what the manager sort of last week they wanted to do. Or a colleague of mine did an analysis on the Jira tickets, 35,000 Jira tickets, because management had ideas that thought what development effort was going on. Turned out they were completely wrong. And using AI to analyze all of the tickets, turned out that the actual majority of the effort was in completely different areas. That's very, very common. Same thing with support. Now, so this is a bit reactive. I'm talking about, okay, somebody comes and asks you for stuff, go and run some AI, do a bit of Python code and run some stuff. Really useful. But there's also things where you can embed it, and that's, I think you're all familiar with, this is the example, by the way, finally get into it. Imagine when you do support, it's just a common thing. You send out this thing afterwards, hey, how did you like it? Please click here, and you might give your Starbucks gift card if you like, blah, blah, blah. What if instead you had an AI reading all of the email correspondence or call transcription, these interactions that people were having, whether it's sales or support or whatever, and just got that judged from that conversation whether the customer was likely to have been happy or unhappy at the end. That's not beyond the realm of possibilities to do, right? And then you could have a pretty much live scoreboard of how does our customer satisfaction look right now in near real time. That's not hard to do. You wouldn't get a human to do it because that's very hard work. Right? You can't get the support person to score it themselves because they're just going to say they all have to, right? So, that's another good use case of categorizing that. So this one is the last one. So this bit of caution on this one. Right? So the specific example I'm going to give you is one of our customers deal with people who drive company cars. So they do some service around that for a lot of companies. Now, in order to drive a company car, probably half of you don't know what that is anymore because that's all supposed to be pre-COVID in the real world. But you actually have on your insurance, you specifically have to have an insurance policy that says you are allowed to drive a business. Okay, that's good. Except all of the insurance companies do that in different ways, and all of the insurance policy documents all do differently. So their solution was, well, scan in and upload your insurance document, and then somebody can sit and read it and look for the text that says yes, you can drive a business, and then put a tick box next to say yeah, done. Right? That's really tedious, right? Literally, imagine that was your job all day. Yep. AI can do that really well. Right? And there's, so you can think about that when you have these documentary evidence things where people have to bring in documents to prove things. Another client of ours, they, for some obscure reason, have a requirement that if you want money taken out of your investment pot, you have to provide them with a bank statement so they can be sure you have typed in your account on it. Don't even ask, but that's the requirement. It's global, so they can't use open banking. But anyway, but again, AI can do that for you quite reliably. Right? You don't have to have a human sitting there doing this. The obviously other thing is things like proving identity and all that kind of stuff, AML, KYC. Just be careful with those because sometimes there's fraud elements and stuff like that. So you can do that, especially if all you're doing is replacing a human that's just looking at a scan, and AI can do that just as well. But in that whole identity thing, just be aware of the legal ramifications of it. So do that one a bit more cautiously. Reading an insurance policy, reading a bank statement, that's dead easy to do. Automate it. Automate it. Terrible saying build some slides. Okay. Generations. Let's get some. Sorry. I need a drink. Sorry. So this is the one I talked about earlier, the difficult one, right? Also the sexy one. So I'm going to give you a few examples. So the first one, somebody we spoke to. This is idea stage at the moment. This hasn't been built yet. But what they do, they're very, very specialized outfit. They do school trips or itineraries for school trips. So school will call them up and say, hey, we want to take a group of year 9s to Rome 4 days. Build us an itinerary, right? So this company, very specialized outfit, they have some really smart, very dedicated people who have been doing this for a long time. So they know Rome, they know all of these places. They have the filing cabinet full of previous itineraries they've done. They can sort of go and look these things up and find out, okay, if you do this, these are the Unites, they want to see this, and it takes 15 minutes to walk from there to there, blah, 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 right? And that's great, but it relies on these people having a lot of knowledge in their heads. And AI ain't going to replace that. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what an AI can do is can be a tool that can be used by that person to access all of the previous itineraries they've ever done. You can go and do the searching for flight schedules. You can go and look up on Google Maps. How long does it take to walk from, I want to say some Roman landmarks now, but I haven't actually finished Rome yet. Start from there to there, right? And all of those and help them and have that interactive thing. And that's, so we've been designing that tool with them. Not there yet, but the idea is that it's not replacing a human. It's not a fire and forget. It's an interactive tool where it's used as a conversation partner, to do the grunt work. And as you can see, that will then increase quality, it will increase throughput, and it will make this company less vulnerable to losing a few key members of staff. So it's a sexy, right? On hard, right? This one is not very sexy, it's quite boring, but it's very important. So there's lots and lots of systems and processes that rely on humans reading text, and maybe they have AI helping them with that text, maybe they don't, but it ends up with some kind of output that goes out to a customer, right? Whether that's a salesperson sending out proposals, or it's a support person doing tickets, or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. There is an output that goes to some kind of external person in the end. Now, when I say quality of that, well, that comes in many forms, right? So it isn't just, is the grammar and spelling right? Is the company tone right? So in our company, do we like to speak formally or informally? How kind of language do we use, right? Sort of knowledge about what kind of things do we like to get complaints about? What do we know that people like? How do they like it phrased? If we're doing medical stuff, is it sympathetic enough? If we're doing support stuff, are we making it too technical, that kind of stuff? That's where AI is really useful, because you can write, a few pages of instructions to say, just take these documentations before they go out, just read through them and come back and say, given how we like to communicate in this organization, does this quite fit that, and make some suggestions? In NewOrbit, my business partner is Sean, and he's very particular and very good at how we send out communications to customers. So we actually built a little Shonifier, we call it, and it's quite useful. So when certain customer comes to out, they get sponsored with the Shonifier, and they sort of rewrite the slide to fit the company style, and it works remarkably well. So that one isn't particularly sexy, but it's really very, very useful, especially when you have a large organization. There's lots of people sending these things out, because there's always somebody who writes it in a way that just isn't as useful. And then this is a tool we're building for ourselves, Alan. That has a long history, right? Called Alan, but the requirements assistant. So the problem we're trying to solve, I should start with the dream that managers might have. This is, we're going to write a requirement for a system. Okay, all we need to do is get on a call with the client and record it, right? Then we get the transcript, and then we give it to an AI and say, just go and write the use cases, right? It doesn't quite work like that, because there's a lot of context, right? Most requirements are written about systems that have been around for like years. So there's a massive amount of existing requirements and existing knowledge and relationships with people and other contexts and documents and presentations and stuff. And the truth is, when you're writing a requirement, you can't just get a new BA off the street and say, hey, go into this system, listen to this one conversation about the requirement. That's bonkers, right? You need the context. But what you can do is build a support system and a helper that can look at your Jira or whatever tool you're using for your project management, find similar requirements from the past, look at your documents, yes, and give it the transcripts of the conversation you had, and then work with the analyst and have the chat window and have the requirements being written and have the context put in and sort of get it to help you. So you're like, can you please put some outcome definitions or definitions of done or whatever language you use? Can you put that in the user source? Can you split the user source? Actually, can you merge those there a bit too small, too big? You can do all of that kind of stuff. And so this is a whole tool built from scratch to do that. And again, personal productivity AI can't really do that because it doesn't have those sort of 3 pages that I'm pointing at there. So again, that's something you have to code yourself. And it's very similar to how developers work. It's very similar to development, sort of taking it out into another world. So I think that's quite sexy. I like that. So we're doing that for ourselves, and we're probably going to give it to our customers as well, when they write requirements for us to be in event to rewrite them after time. So this will hopefully help. Okay. So good. Timing is good. Excellent. So just on that, so just to recap on that one. So this was the ideation framework. So as I said, if you basically just go and use those 3 questions, okay, I should say, yes, generation, comprehension, and categorization. Just use them as idea generators. Just stop and think, where do we rely on comprehension of information? Where do we need to categorize them? Where do we have things that need to categorize? And then where do we produce outputs? And then use them as idea prompts rather than just trying to think about everything. Okay? Now, coming on to embedding AI in systems. In fact, no, I lied. I have another detour first. Sorry, guys. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the personal productivity tools work. So how does ChatGPT, Claude, and Copilot work? This is massively simplified. Okay, so I mean I'm deliberately saying things that are not strictly true here on purpose to simplify. So please don't shoot me. Okay, it's I do it on purpose. But it's important. I want to explain how they work because there are so many misconceptions about. People think that how those tools work is how you can use them in your own systems, and you can't. It's a different world. I'll explain that. This is why I'm doing this. There's a reason for it. So if you have a large language model, okay, all you can do with the large language model is you can send it a message or some text, and it will give you some text back. That's it. You can't have a conversation with it. You can't. It don't remember you. You can't do anything. That's it. That's the loop, right? And if you go back to it again, there's another message. There's no knowledge that you spoke to it 10 seconds ago. Okay. That's what you get out of the box. Okay. So when you look at ChatGPT, that's obviously not very practical because you want to have a little chat back and forth, and and it needs to remember what you said like 5 messages ago. But that's all done in the ChatGPT code or the Copilot code. That's deterministic software. It's not clever. It's not smart. There is this concept of this chat thing and your chat history. That's just deterministic code. You could write that. It's no magic about it, right? Now, there's some clever stuff about understanding when you send a message up to ChatGPT, like this is the 15th message in a row. ChatGPT might take the whole message history and send to the last language model. It probably won't. It will probably compress that, or it will probably do something called an intent thing where you read your chat history and then the last message. And then it figures out what intent you want to answer. And you might even use another large language model to figure out the intent from your chat history before, and it takes that intent and then sends that to the language model to get the thing. And there's a reason it would do that, okay? So, but that's all here. That's not magic, okay? It's not in the large language model. The other one is memory. That's something people are so excited about. Hey, my AI knows me. And it's like, it knows I have a 3D printer. It's like, it's just a database. In fact, the Claude is literally a text file. You can see it in the UI. All that happens is that tool, that deterministic code, picks out things from the conversations and it puts it, and it says this might be useful in the future. It puts it in a text file in a database in the application, in the deterministic code. And then when you're sending a request, you go and do a search to say, okay, given that, you've just asked about this stuff, is there anything in the memory that might be relevant to that? And then it's, oh yeah, there's some stuff that might be relevant. So just plug that up, put it on the end, and send it up to the large language model and say, hey, the user asked for this stuff, and here's some stuff that might be relevant. That's all memory is. No magic about it. Right? And then lastly, tool calling. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same idea. So you know how you ask Copilot about something and he says, well, I'm going to go and search the web for you. And then he searches the web and he finds stuff. And people think, oh, that's the large language model searching the web. It's not. It's the deterministic code. All that happens is ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude sends up a list of tools to the large language model. It says, this is what the users asked for. And then it says, if you want to, here's some tools you might want to use. And then the large language model says, oh, okay. Given what they've said, and I can see there's a web search option here, it just basically sends it back to ChatGPT and says, hey, can you run this tool you have given me called web search and put in this query? And then ChatGPT does that, and then it gets the results back, and it then takes the exact same prompt it sent before and just adds in the search results and sends the whole thing up again. And then the large language models might go, that's great, here's an answer. It might say, okay, now can you run this other tool? And then it goes back and back and back and forth. And that's how it happens. Again, no magic. It's all just deterministic code. But it's important to understand that that's where that lives, because you get none of that when you're talking to a large language model code. Okay. So now I am actually going to talk about how to do it. So again, your code, you get that. Okay. So all you get by default is you can send something to a large language model, you can get something back. Set. Nothing else happens. So if you need RAG, tool calling, workspaces, memory, chat history, you have to write it. That's important. And I know everybody's thinking, oh, I know, I can just use some code to talk directly to ChatGPT. For the love of all that's wrong, don't do that. Okay, because you're going to get so many weird side effects. Just don't even try that. Okay. Now, there are frameworks that can help you, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But, so here's the things you need to think about, okay? At least as a starter. The first one is your system prompt, okay? So, the system prompt, there's this whole system prompts and user prompts. As far as I've been able to work out, they're just the same. By the time it reaches the LLM, it's just a little text, but we like to talk about the concept of this different things. Your system prompt is the thing behind the scenes that tell the large language model how you want it to work. Okay? Now, if you have something in your system and your process where you're embedding the AI that allows the user to put in some questions or whatever, you want to have a system prompt that sits behind that. And basically what happens is your system prompts get sent to the LLM and then the user's thing goes at the bottom underneath that. Okay? Those system prompts, if they're not a few pages long, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay? Because there's a lot you need to think about in terms of instructing the large language model how to behave. But that's the first thing, you've got to think carefully about that. Don't just stick a text box on the front and then just send whatever the user sends in there up to the large language model. That's a bad idea. Lots and lots of security holes and bad things can happen. The second thing is RAG. So that's retrieval augmented generation. And you may think, well, that was last year's news and stuff. There's still a place for it. What it is the idea that the user, there's something that is a query from the user or the system is trying to autonomously do something. Let's say you want the system to look at potentially finding answers to a support ticket. It's a naff example, I know, but it explains the story well. And the first thing you want it to do is, well, have we ever done something like this before? You might have 150,000 tickets in your support system. So what would be nice would be, if I could go and find 3 or 4 tickets that did something similar to this one, and then I could find the answers. That would probably help if I can give those to the large language model and say, hey, the users asked this, and by the way, here's 3 or 4 other questions in the past that are similar. Can you have a look at those as well and see if they're helpful when you come up with your answer? That's RAG, that's retrieval augmented generation. That's all it is. The only thing that's smart about it really is something called vector databases, where I can find other pieces by meaning, not by words. Okay, that's beyond the scope of it. Just bear that in mind. Don't rely on keywords, they're not very powerful. Vector databases is the one. And the thing that some people would argue has replaced RAG is this tool calling. I explained it a minute ago. Because instead of having you searching the support database to find the tickets and send them up, you could just say to the LLM, hi, here's a tool you can use to search our support ticket. And that's fine, that works, but if you know that's always going to happen, then all you're doing is wasting tokens by doing a completely unnecessary round trip. Because all you're doing is setting it up, being told search the database, and then come back, and then you send the exact same question up again with those tickets. So RAG has a plex. When you know that is the normal case, please just build RAG, okay? But also tool calling, other things. Tool calling is very important for accessing lots and lots of other things in your organization. It's also the one you use to do side effects. So if you want your AI to actually do something, like send an email or update a record in the system or something, that's tool calling. That's how you do it, okay? Don't try to invent your own methodology. Just define the things that the AI has to call in order to achieve the outcome of the side effect you want. And then it tell your front-end code when that needs to happen. Now, the good news is there are frameworks that will handle things like tool calling. Like LangChain is a really good example, but there's several others. And they just do it. So your code doesn't have to understand how to decipher the message from the AI that says run this tool, and then run the tool, and then blah, blah, blah. It'll just do it for you. So please do use the frameworks for that. Other things, if you have interactive tools where you're sort of talking back and forth with a customer, then you need to think about things like memory. Is this a scenario where you want systems to remember things about this person? I want to say memory is probably the most difficult, one of the more dangerous things. I've seen people just jumping, oh, we need memory in this thing, when memory is completely the wrong answer. The reason they do it is because the frameworks that I mentioned before, they tend to have a memory built in. You say, oh, I know, I need to remember stuff and use it and stuff, and I'm just going to use the memory construct. Don't do that, because 9 times out of 10 is actually the wrong answer. Memory has a very specific use case, and don't use it unless you're really, really sure that's what you're trying to do. Like people who use instead of RAG, something's memory. Context workspace, and I mentioned before intent. Okay? That's a very important thing, right? So, especially as I said, this is interactive. So, when you're having this chat history back and forth, so in our Alan before our requirements assistant tool, there's going to be a conversation back and forth, right? Now, every time I talk to the large language model, if I send you that whole chat history and the context and everything else, it's not going to be very useful. So what I want to do is I want to boil it down to actually, given the chat history, this is what the user wanted. I can boil it down to a couple of paragraphs. And you might use another language model to do that. That's fine. But it makes sense because then you have the intent. Now that intent is what you then use for your RAG, because now you have something that's condensed and you can actually go search for relevant context. And it's something you can give to the LLM with that context and with the tools you can encode. So think very, very carefully about how you identify intent that goes to the LLM. Okay? And again, very overlooked because we're so used to the magic in the personal productivity tools that we just think, oh, we just have a chat history, and somehow the LLM does it all. It doesn't. In fact, how many here use Claude? So if you look at Claude and if you notice it, it'll say something like, you give the thing and it's working away. It'll very brief to show, I'm sending this query, and you will find a rewritten thing of what you said. That's actually what's good. What goes to the last thing is what is not actually what you put in. It rewrites it for you. That's intent. Now, so yes, do consider that. Do think about the framework, LangChain, semantic kernel, various others. Okay, so one beginner mistake, and then how to do it right. So this is what I see a lot, right? So remember I spoke about this this training thing with doing the transcript. So we had a recording doing the transcript, figuring out who the speakers was and which person was which side in the conversation, and then categorizing the mistake and all of that kind of stuff, right? And literally the first attempt I saw of that was this giant prompt that said, here's a recording, and I want the spreadsheet over there with scores on it, right? And like the person trying to do it, like they were like, but it's so unreliable. I change one thing and then the other things break, and I do one thing and it works and the other one it doesn't. And every time I run it on the same stuff, I get different. Like, that's a really bad idea. Don't approach it like that. Okay. The pro way to do it is break it into small tasks, right? Software engineering 101, right? So in that trainer thing, we had like a pipeline of like 6 different steps, right? Converting from a recording to a transcript, that's one step. Figuring out which person is a salesperson and which person is a separate step, right? So on and so on. So there are different steps in the process. And that's really important. Break it down like that. That way you can test it as modular and it works. It also means a couple of things. Firstly, you can actually use dedicated services for things. Now, yeah, GPT-5, you can give it a recording and it can probably do a transcript for it. But it's way faster and cheaper and way more reliable to just use a dedicated model or a dedicated service that does transcripts. Right? Don't use the language model for what it's not useful. The second thing is, different language models are good at different things, and they have very different performance and price boundaries, right? So, if you need to summarize a big body of text, GPT-3.5 is pretty damn good. You don't need Opus 4.6 or GPT-5 to do that. So, what you might want to do is say, well, I'm going to summarize this stuff with 3.5, and then I'm going to write the output with Opus 4.6. That's a good way of doing it. You're optimizing both performance and cost. Okay? But you can't do that if you have one giant prompt. You can only do that if you have a pipeline of small discrete steps. Okay? So standard software engineering, right back to where we started. All right? But that genuinely is it. That's really one of the biggest things I can say to do that. All right. Good. So we'll have time for questions. That's perfect. So that was sort of the technical thing. We talked about ideas and stuff. We talked about the technical approach. Now I'm going to talk just a little bit about the organizational approach. And this is more about how you manage your managers and how you manage the business side of things. Okay. So, and this is just a couple of points. I mean, I could talk about this for a whole day. This is pretty standard stuff, but it's important to redefine it. The first thing is get your ideas out. And then start using ICE, which the next slide is about ICE, I'll explain that. And then make sure that you talk to your business about the outcomes. What are they really trying to do? Because one thing you often find in business is that people trying to implement a technical change have a very different understanding of the business direction than the people who are trying to steer the ship or whatever you want to call them. And so make sure you actually get clarity, right? Because sometimes the business cases just don't align. You might be using, I can save 3 heads or something, and it just says, I'm not interested in that. I want to expand into France and Germany, right? Make sure that you understand the outcomes. What are we trying to do here? Are we enable us to expand? And we want to save money? What's the goal here? Make sure you put clarity with goal and then come up with the approach to try and achieve that goal. Okay? That is important because if you're trying to do these ideas without business outcomes and business direction, it's probably going to not get a lot of credit for your hard work. People are not going to care. That's a shame. So, how many is familiar with ICE prioritization? So, the thing you'll all be familiar with whenever you're prioritizing cases, what people always ask about is impact. What's the impact of this feature going to be? And AI is no different, right? And the other one is how much is it going to cost? Or in ICE, we call it ease. How easy is it? And that's different because we can give it a higher number if it's cheaper. Right? And that just makes the math easier when you're working out the score. But C is the confidence. Okay. Now, that's the key because I said before, a lot of this is non-deterministic. Okay, so when you're doing traditional software, you can at least pretend to yourself that you understand, you have clear confidence about how sure you are that this feature is going to do the thing and that you can do it. With AI, you know you can't predict that. So you need to understand the confidence, and you need 3 metrics. What's the impact? What's the confidence? And how much is it going to cost? What's the ease? Okay. And then what you do, and you put those 3 ideas and then you rank them. And then what you do is say, okay, I really like those ideas though, but I have no confidence that they're getting a low score. What experiment can I run to increase my confidence? And that's the mindset you have to use with AI. And this framework, if you look it up on the internet, gives you a framework you can use with management to explain what you're doing. And the point is, so imagine I said to you before about, let's say a manager gets really in love with this idea that we can real time do customer happiness assessment on our support tickets, right? You can start building a system that extracts the emails and does all that stuff. And the truth is the AI bit is this much, right? And plumbing is this much, right? You're building your dashboards and your extraction and input, blah, 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 right? Or you can say, you know what, I have no confidence it's going to work because I don't actually know whether our tickets are of a nature where we can really find that out. So what experiment can you run? Well, you could say, well, we're going to just manually extract. I'm going to get somebody to just spend a few hours, write a PowerPoint query or not PowerPoint, Power BI query or whatever. And I'm going to extract all of these 10,000 tickets into a folder on my hard drive or into a CSV file. And then I'm going to knock a bit of Python script together in a Jupyter notebook that runs through those tickets and tries to do the thing. And I can see them tweet that. And by now, you've probably spent a couple of days, tops, right? And you can go back and say, you've done this, and these are the results. And either you can say, I can now have much higher confidence that this will work. And you can go back to management and say, hey, I run this thing you asked for the last 3 months worth of data. This is the data I can give you. Is that actually what you want? Does that actually give you a business outcome that you need? And if they say, yeah, that works, and yes, the data works, no, then you go and build all the rest of it because you have a higher confidence, right? And it goes back into the re-rank. And that is absolutely the key to this stuff. Doing it this way, and I said, this gives you a tool to it. It's a market ad, by the way, absolute fool, amazing guy. So, okay, really again, key takeaways for now. So 2 main things. So the framework, comprehension, categorization, and generation, users as question prompters. And it's a new paradigm. Experimentation is key. You need to understand, you need to learn. I know, people who've been in the industry, I have done this for 30 years, know how this industry works. I'm sorry, you don't. Not anymore. It's a different industry. Back to school. That's hard. Okay. But have direction, understand where you're trying to go with this thing. Not where. Okay. Listen, thanks very much for your time, Stuart and Adam. Please, thanks so much for inviting me to come and talk today. If you want to chat, reach out. I've got to get much questions in a minute. We do all that. And or go and look us up if you want. Questions?
you can't answer this before, but could you expand a little bit more? To explain how with things like Claude and ChatGPT, you've got the large language model, you've got the deterministic code which sits between it and is doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then you went on to explain how when you're using the AI in the tools you build here, you communicate with the large language model and have to do the relevant bits of that.
Yeah.
Why is it a bad idea to utilize the stuff in Claude or ChatGPT that sits rather than going directly to the large language model to utilize all that stuff that sits in between there? You said that you get some bad consequences.
So that's a really good question. And to be fair, I don't know that you would. I'm pretty sure you would. I haven't tried it. I'm not even sure you technically can, but imagine you could. For starters, it's not designed for that use case. It's designed for doing what it's doing, right? So all of the stuff is designed to do, then starts influencing what you're doing. It also means you don't get the control. The thing about breaking things down sensibly and controlling the context and the memory and the intent of all those kind of things, you sort of lose control. It's mainly that. I'm sure that there's some simple use cases where if it is possible to even interface with those things directly, you may be able to. If you have no control, there's just too much black box in the middle, and then start doing things. It'll probably be too expensive anyway. It's cheaper usually to run straight to the last thing as well. So I'm not saying you can't do it. I just don't think you want to.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Frans. That was a brilliant talk. I'm interested to know your experience of customer readiness for adoption. I asked that in the context of this week we had a demo at my company from a collections supplier. So we sell stuff and then we have to chase people up to pay us. And so there's all this stuff that they offer, and AI is the buzzword. We've had a number of companies at RFP stage saying, hey, we can do this. And so much is, hey, it's not AI. And I just had that kind of pinch me reality moment to say, a message like one of our leaders to say, you're talking here about having all emails automatically responding to people saying, you've overcharged me. AI, the sender address is ai@companyname.com. So like, oh, what was that? Can I just check this list? And then you're going to get into this email dialogue back and forth. And I was like, there's a bunch of people in this demo meeting who are really excited about the cost savings. I'm actually a bit more concerned about like the cultural impact and what will that feel like for our customers. Actually, for me, I want, I'm sort of rambling, but you get my point, right? I'd like to understand your experience of working with your customers.
I think, absolutely, it's back to my wife's house. It's the same kind of thing, right? I think it's difficult. I think there's a few, and I don't have an answer in terms of how to fix it. Okay? All I can do is share some of my experiences. I think fear, uncertainty, and doubt is a big factor. Okay? So if you sort of look at the psychology of this, so I think you get sort of a couple of different camps. You get the camps that are like, oh my God, we're going to fire all of the people and just replace everything with automation and save tons of money, right? That's just delusional, okay? And they're running too fast, and that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing that with a lot of the big tech companies who fire too many people and now paying the price. They're realizing it's not quite that. And usually, you've got to give them a reality check if you can and say you don't need to rush that fast. Yes, it's important. Yes, it's a paradox. Yes, you're going to go out of business if you don't do something, but you don't have to do it today. But again, that's really hard. But that's the first thing. And then that sort of goes in with the hype people who think that AI is going to take over everything and that either leads to nihilism or fire everybody. But the others, so that's hard. And I think you're right. Try and ask them whether we can experiment, whether we can actually try and do some trials to test this out, try and take it a little bit slower, and that's all you can do. But sometimes people are determined to hurt themselves and hurt other people in the process. I actually think the thing I see probably more often is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, especially in senior management. But it's not expressed as such. Okay, and I've touched on it very briefly before. So think about this. So you're sitting there. You were the CEO of a company with hundreds of people. You've been doing this for 30 odd years, right? Your whole identity is, I'm brilliant at this. I know how this works. Everybody asks me, everybody looks up to me because I know this, right? Now, I'm not telling you, you don't know shit. Sorry. That's hard, right? And what you won't get these people saying, oh, I'm scared of AI, or whatever. You will get them telling you why it's not going to work or why they're different, blah, blah, blah. And it will come across as strong confidence. But what underlies it, in my experience, is the uncertainty in that. They might not even know themselves that they are actually feeling that because they are good enough at even self-delusion, if that's a requirement. That's what they've done. Again, there's studies in that. I'm not even joking. But I think, and the problem is how do you deal with that? Because again, that's deeply psychological. How do you manage people through that process, especially if there's 3 levels above you, right? So, and I don't know how to do it. I can't give you an answer, but I think those are also 2 things you're dealing with.
I think you actually answered it by talking about outcomes.
Yes.
Having a vision and I think I'm so with you. I overlooked the experimentation option. So it's got to be outcomes. And I think that's where my mind was going during that call. It's like, have you thought this through?
Yes, and I think experiments work on both of them, by the way. I have to think for that. Because you're right, with experimentation, you can get people to slow down a bit and test it, but it also works on the people who don't want to touch it. You can say, well, can I at least do a trial? Because then it's only when you can start showing them some real world use cases, it starts hacking into that thing. And again, they will almost always actually start to recalibrate and then start figuring out what they need to do. It's just, 5 years ago when I realized I had to spend in it, like about this half a decade, transforming my business, NewOrbit, from not having AI to having AI dev tools. I was like, can I just retire now? But once you start seeing it, you've got to dust yourself off when you do it. So your experimentation is the way, all the way.
So we've got time for about one more question. Okay.
So the topic of the entire conversation is really important to me, which is going past just using the out of the box Copilot, ChatGPT, obviously. But I think that there's a worry about playing. I mean, you said go back to school, which is really, really relevant. But how do people do that safely?
It's a very good question. You do that, and that's exactly right. You do it by finding small use cases that you can safely experiment on. You do proof of concept, you do sandwich experiments, you do them when they're not affecting real customers at all. You start and just test that the things work. And again, that is the thing. The back to school, there's also organizational training and stuff like that. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about how when you're training in organizations, people have been training technically how to write a prompt. This is the stride or whatever it is. It's all useful, but actually it turns out the real skills of management. If you want to use an AI well, you need to be managed. That's actually what and Microsoft has a massive study on it. And that's all in personal productivity, but it's the same principle. But here's the interesting thing about experimentation. If I say to you, do deterministic software, do a proof of concept trial, we might sometimes talk about a couple of months to try it. With machine learning, you're talking weeks, sometimes months. With large language models, 9 times out of 10, we can knock something together in a week, literally, that is demonstrating that it works or doesn't work. It's that in itself, experimentation, back to school, trying things is so much faster now. And you know what? You can write code as well, because it's not production code, right? Just hang it together, try it.
So, final round of applause for Frans, please. Just realised I didn't check online if anyone had any questions. Sorry, people online, did you have any questions? You've got hoots and claps online, but I haven't got any questions. Okay, all good?
Okay, ooh, thank you. I'm just going to present 2 more slides.
Yeah, there you go. Good, thank you.
Cool. Upcoming events in Shoutouts now. I'm actually giving up. It's AWS Summit in person in London next week. So I know, and it's still our company very excited about it. We will be there. If anyone else is there, come and see us at our booth. We're going to show you our version of harness. And we've cunningly named it Hand Harness. There you go. Then on the same day, all the code for the rest of us.
Yeah. So AI for the rest of us is a really good meetup. They run an interesting conference as well.
they're doing their Claude session that Wednesday, so a week today.
Excellent. And then Vibe UX prototyping at speed of thought, the speed of thought. So a similar vibe.
Yeah, so Dave Westcott is a great presenter if you've ever seen him. He's a PST, I think. I saw him at Lean Agile Scotland last year. Great guy.
Cool. Science and Ray, were they here or there?
So this one is at there, 0 degrees.
Yes.
Yeah, energy and climate conundrum.
Very important stuff. What's the flip is happening to our field? Matt May is going to be talking about product.
Yeah, so that's Product Tank at the end of the month back in this room. So Matt is a well-known speaker, writer, and so his session is going to be really interesting. So come and join that.
And business agility unlocked.
So this is on there because I'm speaking at that one. So if you find yourself in Canary Wharf on the 7th of May, that's where we'll be. But interesting set of speakers. So it's me, Giles, there's a few other people who are on the list for that. So good. It's a bit of a trek to get to Canary Wharf, but it will be interesting. And it's being run by a bank, so I presume the beers and the things will be quite good. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then we've got Mike talking about the accidental time. Crazy text.
Does anyone else have any other community shout outs for anything they're doing, anything they want to share? We basically look around everywhere we can find things and try to share as much as we can, but anything else? Cool. It's interesting that some stuff is moving to Luma as well, which is interesting. We did it because Miro made us do it, but and we also don't want to give more money to meetup.com, but it's interesting the drift. Cool.
Cool. We did have a very bizarre question online. I joined very late, if not already covered. What's the future of NL to SQL? NL, natural language to SQL. So if you are doing anything in SQL, using natural language to inject queries in SQL, very, very fun, dangerous stuff. As a compliance and AI person, yeah. Good luck with that, is what I'm saying.
I mean, there's stuff you can do in Power BI and Sigma and those sorts of things, which kind of starts to kind of put a little bit of control space around that. But for like, tell me the best salesperson in our Northwest region type of thing is the kind of general use case that goes with it. Would I want it to be doing other things other than that sort of analytics? No.
Yeah. The fun example is when you give it access to all the tables and you ask, what is this person being paid in our business?
Exactly. Where does the CEO live and how much is he paid?
Cool. So best of luck to you. Cool. Right. Final slide. Yeah, we can get to the FutureSkills Miro board at any time. There is another one after this. Extendable time machine we've talked about, and a really good graphic. I love that. But we have a call for speakers. So Mike will be talking next month. There will be time if you want to do a lightning talk. Please reach out to us because it's a sort of shortened talk. So if you want to just practice something, come here. We're a lovely audience, so we'd love to host you. And with that, just contact us. So, thank you.
Thank you.